Just check this is on. Ooh, lost my mouse. There we go. Should be right. Hello. Yes, thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here, and nice to be preceded by an all-girl chorus, which is something I've always dreamed of and has never actually happened. So I'm an artist and designer from London, and I work with the futures, and I mean futures because the future is uncertain, and that kind of forms the basis of my talk, because no matter what Google or Apple or whoever are telling you about the future and all these visions you have on TV and in magazines and whatever, it's kind of uncertain and messy and very human. And the reason I work with futures is because by looking at the future, we can learn a lot about ourselves today. So once we look forward to how the world might be in 20, 30 years, we can kind of see the changes and powers and drivers that are happening today that might form that future. And then by doing that, we can open up debate and reflection and critique of what that world is and what we could do today to sort of change it or influence it. And so in that capacity, I'm here to introduce the idea of the new dawn, which to me basically means a new set of rules. And I think we've figured out now that the pre-2008 world isn't coming back. Like, no matter what the troika or the great big banks tell you, we're never going to have an age of limitless capital and endless growth and guilt-free consumerism again. And so what we're starting to see, well, futurists are starting to see, and a lot of is coming more into popular culture, is kind of the bubbling trends of what the alternatives are, what the kind of solutions are that are around that might lead to a different kind of future to the one we're always told about. So I kind of want to take you on a guided tour through some of these potential futures and through some of the trends that we're noticing and some of the things that we're seeing to kind of set you up for this new dawn. But also I want to look at artists and designers and creatives and performance artists and all sorts of people who are working with these ideas and critiquing them and looking at them and reflecting on them, because it is your obligation, it is your duty as a creative person to think about the world, to critique it. You have to find a corner of the world that no one else has noticed yet and scratch away at it and try and find out what's underneath, and then you take what you see and you tell everyone else about it. And if you're not doing that and you call yourself an artist or a creative person, then you're doing your job wrong. You're basically an advertiser. So where do we begin on this guided tour? Let's start at the Apple Store in Amsterdam. I believe that's the only Apple Store in the Netherlands, am I right? There's another one. Where's the other one? Oh, okay. I did some searching and I couldn't find it, but okay. So the Apple Store is like the pinnacle of the status quo of design and creativity and futures and trends. It is the combined force of all the things that want to sell you the future. Apple actually lose money on Apple stores. They don't make any money in them per square foot. They're very unprofitable. But what they do is they sell a dream. They act as a cathedral for this fantasy that Apple wants to sell you. The future will be rectangular, it will be black, it'll all be screens, it'll be seamlessly integrated, you'll be able to swipe away at it until you're happy as Larry. But the point is that that's a kind of fantasy, and we need to start to see through it, see through that shiny gleam that tech companies promote. So where can we start? We can start with Kickstarter. It's a pretty well-known thing now, and it's pretty popular, and it's really good, and it works. So you have an idea, and you think it's a pretty good idea, and you put your idea up, you need some money to make it happen, and you try and search for a couple of hundred people or a couple of thousand people that can help you make your idea happen. And the brilliant thing about Kickstarter is it puts control of the idea and the power of the idea back in the hands of the person who had the idea in the first place, which is something we haven't seen for a long time in any sort of creative industry. But we can move further afield. We can look at bitcoins. Have you all heard of bitcoins? So it's a digital currency. It doesn't exist in real life. It was used quite nefariously. Usually there's an internet black market that it funds, but recently it came to popular attention when there was a bit of a crash and people started buying bitcoins and using them. And the thing about the bitcoin is that if currencies can exist outside of the state on the internet, then we start to wonder, what is the role of the state? What is the role of these big powers that tell us this is how money works, this is how it's going to work, this is how we're going to save our economy, when really you can just do it yourself and you can build up? And we kind of saw that happen quite literally in Cyprus recently, where they installed a Bitcoin ATM machine, which is part joke, but also part a really sharp kind of critique of the way currency works and how capitalism is kind of failing with digital growth. 3D printing is the other massive trend. We all know 3D printing now. It's out of science fiction and into reality. You can get MakerBots now. I believe the first 3D printer for under $200 was released a few months ago. In the UK, you can go to your local office supply shop with a 3D file and they'll 3D print for you. This one is the RepRap, which I think is a really interesting 3D printer because of the fact that it can print itself. So the RepRap, actually, you can print all the components to make a RepRap on a RepRap. So, so we already have a thing about 3D printing where it's going to undermine objects and the way we consume, and there's lots of issues around copyright and things, but this is interesting because even the method of distribution is going to work differently. Like now at the moment, if you want to 3D print mostly, you still have to go to a shop and splash out a 3D printer, and some guy still owns the patents for the 3D printer, but this totally changes it. It's completely open source. The problem with 3D printing, though, the well-known problem with 3D printing, is that it's largely useless. Like, no one can figure out what to do with it yet. We've got some really funny, interesting stuff that's being 3D printed around the world, but it has no practical application, really. But that's not the point, because no one's interested in what 3D printing is now, which is like the first photography. People are interested in what it's going to be, or what it could be, and the futures that might come out of this. Oh yeah, we had the 3D printed gun. That was about the big success story of 3D printing, and that fired one shot badly and broke. So it's not such a good success story. If we scale up from the RepRap a bit, we get to something called the Global Village Construction Set, which is an open source project. And that basically says that you start with, it's a scheme, it's an open source scheme, the plans are all online. You start with a 3D printer, an industrial scale 3D printer, and from that you can print all the devices and objects and machines that you need to work a town or a village or a settlement. So it's about self-sufficiency. So you start with a 3D printer, you can print a generator, you can print a tractor, you can print all the things. It's a great idea. The problem with it is that you still need a lot of expertise and a lot of materials and a lot of stuff to get it to work. Not so with Marcus Kaiser's Solar Sinter. The Solar Sinter is genius because it works purely using sand and light. So it has solar panels on the side there that work the motors and the computer inside, and that giant lens on top focuses light onto sand, which melts it into a glass-like liquid, which when that dries, forms a 3D printed thing. It's not great because at the moment you can just about print a bowl, which doesn't have any holes in it. But the point is the futures this opens up, right? The type of places that 3D printing is going to really affect is the type of places where they've got a lot of sand and a lot of light and not a lot of much else. So by using this kind of thinking, we can start to extrapolate about what this is going to mean to people, how this is going to change the world in the future. But we also need to look backwards at ourselves. We can't just offer solutions to other people. We have to think about what we're doing. This is an amazing project by Tom Thwaites called the Toaster Project. It's an art project. And he decided to build a toaster from scratch. You can buy a toaster for, £10, 10 euros or whatever in a shop really quickly. But he decided he'd go out and make it, like make everything. Like he mined the materials, he smelted the plastic, he made the wiring, the electrics, everything he made by hand. And it took him about a year and cost him a few £1,000s. And it's really great. There's a TED talk about it and he's got a book out and everything. But the point is that all those hidden processes and techniques and technologies and histories that go into what we have now are just kind of obstructed by this object. It's a really simple object, it's pretty basic, but the point is it hides the history from you. And so he's trying to reveal that, and especially about manufacturing. Another great project about manufacturing, another art project, is Jeremy Hudson's Error, which is short for error. And he basically sent emails to big mass manufacturing plants in the Far East and in India and things, asking for intentionally faulty products. And he got some pretty amusing outcomes, like the objects that came back were kind of cool. But the thing I can't show you, which is really great about this project, is the conversations he had. Unfortunately, it just won't work on the screen, it just won't show. But he sent emails to companies saying, I'd like you to build, a fork, but I don't want it to have any blades on it. And straight away, this whole email started where the guys in the factory couldn't fathom this. Like, the system of production is so well embedded. Like, why would you want to change this? We don't even understand how to do anything different at this stage. Another great project about mass manufacturing, Cohen Van Balen's very recent project, 75 Watt. This literally came out 2 days ago. It's actually a video, which is why I don't have it, but it's on their website. They decided to design an object, the sole purpose of which is to choreograph a dance down a mass manufacturing line. And it's quite brilliant when you see it. So this strange object that this chap is holding doesn't actually perform any function, but when the guys on the production line build it, they have to perform all these incredible dance moves, which the whole point of the project is to look at control and how you as a consumer are actually dictating the lives of the people who are creating these objects for you. And it is very clever and it's very funny, and they did like a lot of professional choreography with it. But the object is the product of thinking about the people on the line rather than the people who consume it at the end of the process. This is a project of mine. It's the only one I'm going to talk about, don't worry. But it's about revealing hidden things, and I was more interested in digital production. So there's this idea going around at the moment of digital labor. The fact that when you log into Facebook or you watch a YouTube video or you click an ad or use Amazon or whatever, you make money for those people. Like just by logging into Facebook and sending a wall post, you make money for Facebook, and you don't realize it. That's how they make their money, and you're not reimbursed for that at all. And so I designed the idea of a city that was completely enslaved to the internet, that worked entirely for digital labor, and was kind of subsumed over a period of decades into a state where the people that were left were just these kind of ghost-like slaves, like leaning over their computers and working away without realizing it, just getting the really visceral thrill for sort of no pay or money or whatever. I'm going to jump a bit here, just slightly. This is the big dog. Have you seen the big dog? Who's seen it? Okay, a couple of people. So this is a really, really terrifying robot. It's super sinister, super scary, Terminator-style military robot developed by DARPA, which is the US's big military projects research body. And it can run at 20 miles an hour, it can right itself, it can now throw a brick across a room. It's pretty terrifying. But the point is, it's still special. It's still, because it's new, everyone's watching it. You know, I think the YouTube videos of it each have a couple of million hits because we don't understand what it is. It's so alien, it's from another world. It's in this thing that sociologists sometimes call the uncanny valley, where we recognize it, but we don't understand it. Yeah, you could do a better job, but yeah. So I'm interested in what happens once this becomes normalized. And I think that's important because if you remember, like back when the first iPhone was released, it was, oh my God, this is insane. This is like color. But what's happened now, it's everywhere. It's normalized. The glamour has faded from it. This is a lovely painting that's been going around. It's a Photoshop painting for a while because it just perfectly sums up that feeling. What happens once everyone's got a big dog and it's just useless and it's just old tech that no one cares about? And that future that was promised by it, this vaguely terrifying future, has just not worked out, and it's basically in the same position now as an old lady pushing a shopping cart full of plastic bags around. Vincent Fornia also looks at this. He's an amazing photographer. Have you heard of him? I'd recommend getting his book, but I believe there were only 1,000 copies, and I got the last one. Sorry. It's really, really amazing. He's incredible. So this is his project Man Machine, where again he looks at robots, and he was interested in the idea that the robots that come out of the big Japanese tech places like Honda and Toyota or whatever, they always say, oh, there's going to be a robot in every home. We're all going to have a robot. But the thing is, they're still in labs. No one's seen this yet. The closest we've got is the Roomba, which just looks like a hockey puck sliding around the floor. So he wanted to put robots in domestic contexts. He put them in offices. He put them with people, and he photographed the reaction. Because this is where they're supposed to be, but that's still really weird. That doesn't make any sense. And I think what he's tapped into here is the fact that we know this fantasy isn't real. We know it's a lie. Like, it's not ever going to happen that way. It's just something that's sold to keep the whole system moving. Jumping slightly, but sticking with Fornia, this is his most recent project. Vice actually have a video about this, which again, I'd recommend checking out. His space project, where he went to NASA and he photographed the space, the work they're doing now. And it's kind of a shame because NASA's kind of wrapping up at the moment. But what's great about this particular photo is it sums up everything about it. You know, space is Star Trek, it's boldly going, it's exploring, it's going on, but actually it's terrifying, and it's expensive, and it's scary, and it makes us feel small. And that's the kind of thing that he's doing in these photographs, is he's looking at the space around space. So yes, we're all going to space. This is the latest news from the last 2 years or so. Every month now, there's a brand new, highly funded, super well-publicized project to get us all up into space. This is the latest one, MarsOne. The idea is that they will put 4 people on Mars as the first colonists. And you think that's mad, but then 80,000 people have applied to be those first 4 people, which is kind of tells you something about the state that Earth is in. But the brilliant thing about MarsOne is that it's not Star Trek. It's not boldly going. It's not the fantasy of space exploration and man in the stars. It's a reality TV show. This whole thing is going to be funded by reality TV. It's going to be Big Brother in space. Like, that's the state of the fantasy about space exploration, where the only way we can afford it is to make it into a reality TV show. But then also, what's important is now we know it's kind of inevitable in space. I thoroughly believe that within my lifetime, I will see the first colonists off planet. Maybe this project won't work, but there will be another one that will, because it's needed so badly by the people who have the money. We as artists and designers, we have to look at this now. We have to really think about what this means as people. This is the biggest leap we're ever going to make so far, really. And so this is a really great example of that. This is a film by Joseph Popper called The OneWay Ticket. Much like MarsOne, he was interested in what it feels like to be alone going out in space and examining that and just completely losing Earth. And he looked a lot at space psychology and space architecture and things and really studied it to try and understand it. And then that's him there appearing in it. But what was most interesting was the other thing he was looking at was the relationship between science fiction and actual space travel. And I believe the next thing will show that. Come on. Yes, okay. So he was interested in the fact that the image we have of space is largely through science fiction. Like, you recognize this because it's all white polystyrene, but actually, it's just made of polystyrene and cardboard and wood and cups and stuff. It's not actually a real spaceship, but you know that it's a spaceship. You recognize the imagery. And that's kind of what was interesting to him, was how that fantasy contrasts to reality. Another thing related to space, although not directly about space, Nelly Ben-Hayoun's International Space Orchestra. And this is an absolutely incredible project that she's just released and is sort of touring the world now on film. I'm going to show you a trailer version. But she was interested not so much in space, but the idea of using an event to undermine a hierarchy. She was interested in NASA as this massive ancient institution that still stands and represents America and was the whole thing about fighting the Soviet Union. And then kind of implanting into that the idea of a massive event, mixing everybody up, replaying the roles, rejigging it, and using music and performance. And she looks a lot at John Cage and stuff as a way to kind of play with that system. But yeah, those are all real NASA guys that she got to do it. She got them all together. She wrote an opera. She wrote it with Damon Albarn from Blur, and Bruce Sterling, the science fiction author, helped her out on it a lot. And and then use that as a way to kind of play with the idea of the hierarchy of NASA. What's next? Oh, yes, another music thing next. So I also like sticking with this idea of music. The menstruation machine. Right, so I'll start playing it. So Sputniko's a Japanese performance artist. She's actually quite big in Japan. Like Alphaville. But she created a machine that would allow men to feel what it was like to go through menstruation. But rather than just make that and then put it on a plinth in a gallery or in an exhibition, she decided to use Japanese pop culture against itself. So in Japanese pop culture, sexuality is still a bit of a taboo, and so she invented a music video and a character and a whole story that went with this that she could kind of insert into Japanese pop culture, which these videos are just seen as like pop videos in Japanese pop culture. They're not seen as art. But she's using it to kind of undermine itself and talk about taboo subjects in Japan. Okay, yeah, we can go on because we're going to be early. I'd really recommend. She's got a YouTube channel. She's got everything on there. She's got a lot of really interesting projects. But yeah, so there she is as a woman dressed as a man who's pretending to be a woman. It just messes with the Japanese psyche around sexuality, I think. So this is Choikar 5, Prospectus for a Future Body, and this is very much again about body hacking and playing with the ideas of the body. So he took famous dancers from history, and he made 3D models of them, and then using electrodes plugged into another dancer, he forces them to reenact that dancer's moves. He turns a person into a human puppet through a machine. And it's kind of genius, and it's nice, and there's lots of things in there about how technology can control us and what that relationship is, but more importantly, it's talking about authorship. Like, who makes this piece? Does the original dancer make the piece? Does the puppet dancer make the piece? Is he who wrote the program, who made the machine, does he make the piece? What is the piece itself? And so it's kind of this blurring of boundaries that exists with digital technology and sort of computation and things. Back to real life, this is Sun Jifa. He's a Chinese chap who lost his arms in an explosion. And of course, the Chinese government have the monopoly on medical things. So he decided the only solution he had, not being able to afford prosthetics from the government, was to actually make his own prosthetics. And so he got his nephews to build him some. And it turned out he was so good at it that other people started turning up at his door to get prosthetics off him. And now he has the monopoly on prosthetics in China and not the government, which is kind of interesting. So even middle-class people who could afford them, in a sort of small act of rebellion, choose, instead of going to the government, to go to him for their prosthetics. And they're not as well made. They're not as, they're not as medically accurate, but the point is there's an individuality to them. Each of the prosthetics is handmade by him and his nephews, and it's kind of that ability to rebel, subtly against the state. Sticking with medical stuff, this is absolutely amazing. I only found this like 2 weeks ago, but it blew me away. This is an 11-year-old child from America somewhere who has made a biochemical replicator. So that's a device that you use to copy pharmaceuticals, to replicate drugs essentially and things like that. But he's made it out of Lego, and it works. This is terrifying, because that's a $25,000 piece of equipment that he's made out of a toy, right? And it's kind of brilliant, and you're starting to think now, okay, well, what does that mean? When we've got this kind of technology that's a toy, what does that mean for the future? How does that even look once that's scaled up and you're making, entire cars out of Lego or something? I don't know. And then last, looking at that idea of kind of build your own futures, DIY tech. This is a project that I'm working on with the incredible Superflux in London, and we're looking at building what we call an Internet of Things Academy. So the Internet of Things is this idea that soon enough, everything in life will be connected to the internet. Absolutely everything, like your pen, your cup, your hair, whatever. And it'll be giving data away out into the internet, out into the cloud. And then the main driver on that at the moment is for big companies to use that data to make their products better. But we actually want to turn it around and say, well, actually, can we make people better? Can we actually get people to educate themselves about themselves and empower them to make better decisions? And so we're setting up this web platform, the idea being that experts and amateurs and things will be able to get together in order that they can share their knowledge, share their data, and teach each other kind of how to, instead of just consuming stuff to try and improve their lives, how they can hack their own lives and how they can improve the world around them. And the final slide, if I have to tell you what this is, then you're in the wrong building. This is probably the most terrifying and sinister thing out there at the moment, by far. This is the vision of the future you're presented. This is like, there's no choice. This is the future. This isn't futures. This isn't an option. This is Google telling you you will have one of these. And incidentally, by the way, Google will never sell one of these to you because technically they will always own the rights. If you buy Google Glass, they still own it. You're kind of renting it off them. It's super sinister. But it's an unhealthy future, and we know it. It's interesting how Google and Apple and all those kind of big companies that sell us our future have gone from being the saviors of humanity to being the most sinister organizations there are. And so we have to wonder then what the alternative looks like. If this is the Google future and it's all nicely packaged and it's exclusive and it's square and everything swipes and everyone's happy and fulfilled all the time, what does the alternative look like? What does a future built out of the Internet of Things, built out of Bitcoins, 3D printing, built out of Lego? What does that look like? And how does that feel? And are we happy in it? And I think, to be honest, we don't know. Because unlike Google or Apple or whatever, all those big companies telling you the future, we don't have billions of dollars to spend on a massive advertising campaign to convince you of a future. And that's probably for the best. I said at the beginning that it's your obligation as creative people, it's your duty to critique the future, to critique the present as well, to tear apart a corner of the world, look inside it, and tell other people what you see. And to me, that is infinitely more powerful than any pretty picture of the future. Thank you very much. Ooh, just walk off.